So my name is Zoe. I'm an ethical hacker. I like to describe that essentially as a person that looks at something not for what it's meant to do, but what they can make it do for them. And that essentially sums up my job. I look at things offensively. Now, where I am in my career, has anybody ever seen this graph before? It's kind of a joke, but basically it's your perceived knowledge over time and how essentially people start out and they're skilled and they're like, oh yeah, I know everything. And then they get more to a senior position and they're like, oh, I knew nothing. And then they go back up and one day they're this expert. Well, I am right about down there. So hopefully you enjoy my talk. We'll see. Don't forget to vote, but if you don't like my talk, please don't vote for it. But essentially, so today I'm going to talk to you about security. And I'm using a couple examples from what's happened kind of recently about not just security itself in its failing, but I guess more of a perception of why we're failing and more of a broader view. And then I'll get into a kind of a case study of a breach. It's like an autopsy view. And then I'll chat about what I think the future is. So just to start off with, I've got these 3 examples about actually you'll see a consistency across them and where they failed. The first one, and I know it makes a lot of people laugh, is the racist soap dispenser of 2017. The challenge with this soap dispenser, essentially, is it's touchless, and they designed it so a person washing their hands puts their hand underneath, gives soap, and then they can wash their hands. Where they failed in their design, and essentially made it racist, apparently, is, I don't know, obviously I'm not part of their team, but what I think they did is they forgot that not everybody has white skin. Not everyone is as pale as I am. And so when this Nigerian man put his hand underneath the soap dispenser, it didn't actually recognize his skin as skin because it was darker. And whilst it kind of seems a bit silly, it's actually a realization of who did they use as their tests? Did they just forget a whole part of the world? Not everyone is my color of skin. Another example of, again, they kind of looked at, well, this is what we expect, and we'll use that to build what we need, is NASA in this year, I think it was March or June, somewhere in the spring, they were going to have a all-women's spacewalk, which sounds really cool. And then they realized they don't own any women's spacesuits. They have one spacesuit for women. And so they actually had to cancel it. I don't know if they've rebooked it since or have done it since, but it's actually a clear understanding of, okay, well, wait a minute, we have female astronauts, why did we not have more than one spacesuit? And then the last example, in my mind, is actually the most, I guess, dangerous, because the other one, obviously, a bit annoying, actually quite annoying, can't continue, washing his hands. The other one, well, they have to reschedule. The last one is an example of a woman named Emily. So where she goes to school, works, I'm not sure of that, she was going to university, they deployed these robots that, they're food delivery. So you order food, they put food in it, and it self-delivers. Sounds really cool. Except for they forgot that not everyone can walk. And Emily, who's in a wheelchair, was trying to cross the road to her university, and she comes up to this robot, which decided to sit right in the middle of, that dip to get through to the road, the one place that she can cross the street. That robot decided to sit right in the middle and not move because it didn't see a clear path. And so for her own safety, she was actually stuck in the middle of the road, which is quite horrible. And thankfully, she wasn't hurt, but something as simple as, well, I know I can walk around it, but not everyone can. And that was quite, for her, it was quite irritating, I suppose. She was quite angry about it, understandably. The last example, and one that really kind of sticks out to me, is previously there was a man, and he was dating a woman, and he helped her buy a car. They since broke up. But because he helped her buy that car, he knew that private VIN number. I don't own a car, so I imagine it's kind of secret, I don't know. But apparently it's important. And when they broke up, he decided he wasn't happy about it. And so he installed an app to register her vehicle. And because he had that one VIN number, he was able to get information about every single place that she traveled. I think it was through email, as well as access to be able to turn on and off her vehicle, which is very scary. If you think that's, okay, well, maybe he won't use it because he won't cross that line. Well, this man also went into her home at night and stood by her bed. So I don't think there's a wall that he is going to not cross. But the thing is, I don't imagine the developers, when they designed this app for convenience, I can't imagine they were like, oh, let's make it a super stalking like tool. Probably not. But it's simple things like, did you think of the negative? Did you think of the, you test for usability, but did you also test for misuse? Human behavior is usually pretty, we think, oh, okay, well, humans fail, let's expect that. But do we also think humans are malicious? And unfortunately, that doesn't always come up. So how did we get here? How did we create these solutions that weren't very inclusive? Well, I started my career in networking, and I was hired and, I guess, rewarded when things worked. They didn't really care how it worked or why it worked or what it was doing. They just liked that it worked. And so my job, my mantra, my everything was connect everything and just make it work. And if it doesn't work, that's the problem. I didn't have any motivation to do it securely. I didn't have any motivation to do it in a way that, well, can it be misused? It was more just make it work. And that's kind of how our industry has, my industry being security, has always kind of been. People don't want to take that time to do the extra validation. They just want it to bloody work. And again, the internet adds a little bit of anonymity, I can't say that word, but you know what it is. And so it actually is very difficult to figure out who's accessing what and who's doing what. I used to support a lot of the intelligence work at my previous careers, and what happened is we would be able to find out who that person, that malicious actor is, only because they made mistakes. And it gave a very limited legal reach. So we could figure out who they were kind of sometimes, and then we attempted to get them to take information offline, but depending on where they are, it didn't really have sway, and so we had to justify we tried, and then we went to another third party like the hosting provider to get this stuff offline. So again, the internet is great, it's connected, it's just working, but there is a limited legal reach and there's inconsistent borders. So somebody might own something in this country, host it in that country, but actually live in this country. And so there's not really what rules are they actually, do they have to comply with? Which ones can we use to force them to take that data offline, and so on and so forth. And so where does that lead us? I know I'm rushing through this a bit, but I want a lot of time to talk about my case study. But if you do have questions, again, put it in the app. But essentially, this is where it's kind of put us at this point. Things just connect. They don't necessarily do it securely, and they're not really protecting against the malicious user. And that's where that's led us is it's very difficult to prosecute. That connectivity has a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of issues, a lot of threats. The positive side to that is actually because it's difficult to prosecute, the regulations have increased. I know they're not perfect, but because they exist, the positive is the media likes to chat about when a company is breached, which has then led to increased awareness. So companies breached, articles, people become aware. Companies find more articles, people become aware again. And so that's actually led us to much more granular controls because organizations are recognizing slowly that actually people they're not satisfied with the typical, we care about security or we care about your security after they've been breached. They actually need that, well, what can we do? And so on apps, you can enable multi-factor authentication. You can limit your audience to only people you want. You can limit, I want this to this person and this to that person. And that's great, but where is that taking us in the long term? And from my point of view, and where I've worked with multiple different clients across multiple different industries, is this is leading us to two outcomes. One outcome is organizations caring about your data proactively and actually, wanting to help, be it that it's a financial motivation whatsoever, I don't know, but they do want to make a difference. They proactively do validation and make it secure and lower the, mitigate the issue when they are breached. And so that option one is when a company is breached, the consumers are affected, but not as deeply affected. Option two is companies cheap to market, quick to market, just want to get it done, want people to use it. And so those people, when a company is breached, are devastated. So there's those two options. And I think the biggest difference between those two options is the people that are using them typically are, these people are lower income and potentially, don't have the resources to actually go to the companies that care. And why that's important to you is because you guys are the ones that are making these products. And so you want to make that decision of, am I going to be the company that doesn't really care? Even if it's a small little piece, what if I do care and I do make a difference? So I'm going to talk about I just kind of went into that. Basically, technology is, I'm not got that open. So the technology one is they have little motivation, the security one is not inclusive, and the privacy one is they're failing from the start. So I'm going to use Equifax as an example. We're going to just do a quick autopsy view of it. It doesn't have everything. This is based on the research that I've done. I might have missed out a couple of things. Please do let me know if you know things I've forgotten. But essentially, it's a 3-year span starting when originally Apache notified of the structured vulnerability. So on the 14th of February, Apache said, by the way, we're vulnerable to this. And they did actually release a fix, and organizations hopefully would have installed that patch. And then after that, so the 6th is they released the patch, hopefully organizations installed it, and the 7th is when that exploit was publicly available. Now, unfortunately, obviously I don't have insider information on this, but according to the ex-CEO, the tech responsible did not install that patch, and then on the 14th of March, they originally were breached. The 29th of July, so what is that? March, April, May, June, July, 4 months later, they actually discovered, oh, we were breached, let's do something about it, and then the 30th, they patched their system. The thing that really stands out to me is 2 things here. The first is the ex-CEO blamed the tech for not installing that patch. But actually, in my opinion, from a security architect point of view, they failed at the very beginning, because when they designed their infrastructure that is going to be breached, they have critical information in it, they didn't think, or I don't know, somebody didn't think, that maybe we should make it so that if this system is breached or is vulnerable to something, maybe we should make it so that the critical data has mitigating controls or compensating controls so that it doesn't ruin people's lives. Going on from that, why didn't they catch it within 4 months? That's quite a long time. And then, to make it even better, talking about ethics, the CFO, the president of the workforce, and I believe the CEO as well, were all sold shares. They used their insider information to then sell shares so that, they would still benefit even though something massive happened. The CEO on the 26th of September announced their retirement, and they took I don't even know what that number is, 90 million or 90 million US dollar payout, which I'll be honest, if a breach happened because of on my watch and I got that much money on the outcome, I don't think I'd be that unhappy. Another example is, where is it? On the 9th of September, an even worse thing happened. So not only were they breached, not only did they fail when they designed it, but on the 9th of September, Equifax tweeted out, here's the link to get more information and find out if you were actually impacted by this breach. But what they did is, instead of reporting or sending people to their domain, for some reason they wanted to add complexity to the issue, and instead of using equifax.com, they created a whole nother domain, equifaxsecurity2017.com. But their Twitter, unfortunately, sent it to securityequifax2017.com. So not only did they have an original breach, but they actually technically sent them to a potentially malicious website. Later on, I've linked to the person that actually purchased that domain, but the point that I want to make is that he said, I think in his write-up, he had like 200,000 hits a day because they sent him there. Thankfully, he was a security researcher, not a phishing site. But from my point of view, when I actually go and phish somebody, I usually look for a domain that's similar, so they kind of just did the work for him. So further on, CEO blames the individual. They keep announcing more and more and more victims. And then from the original date, the 14th, to the 12th of October, they're like, by the way, guys, it's okay, because we've now removed the malicious software. It's only taken 6 months. And then on the 3rd of November, they say, actually, all of our execs are okay. They didn't use insider knowledge when they traded. Going on from that, so many failures, many not so nice ethics. The 1st of March, they announced more, and then the 14th, right after they announced, actually in 2017, nobody used insider information. The 14th of March, the ex-CEO was charged with insider trading, so clearly he did. The other part that really stood out to me is the 2nd of April, if we go on as well, in 2018, they realized, so not only did we have an original breach, but unfortunately, when we sent out those notification letters, some of them contained the wrong name. So some victims received other victims' names. I would consider that another incident, but I don't know if they did. And then in 2018, on the 17th of October, an Equifax engineer was sentenced for insider trading. So this engineer was tasked in August of 2017. He was tasked with building the notification website. This, again, really hits home to me because this was a tech, and I relate to techs, and this is really disheartening. But he figured out, he was told, by the way, you're creating this notification website. It's for a VPI client. Don't say anything, essentially. And he realized through the data he was entering on this notification website that it was Equifax, his own company, was the actual client that was notifying. And so what he did is he used his wife's brokerage account to say, if the shares drop over X amount, I think it was, sell it. So he made money off of it. But he used, again, insider information, and really, really sketchy. The last bit here is, so original breach 2017, end of 2018, Equifax says, by the way, it's okay, guys, because we're going to increase to have a longer, I think it was 2 years of credit monitoring. But the catch is, we're going to use Experian to do that. And why that really stood out to me is because Equifax had a lot of personal data. When they passed over to Experian to use the Trust ID, Experian had a lot of personal data. They did say to them, January 31st, you can opt in. Theoretically, if you don't opt in, they shouldn't get that data. The thing is, they already had a lot of the data. So Experian already had access to the name, address, social security number, or social insurance number, or national insurance number, whatever you call it, and date of birth. And if you opted in, the only additional information that they're going to get access to is your phone and email. That seems a bit sketchy to me. And then after that, so going into 2019 now, the latest update that I saw was they said, please, the public response to the settlement has been overwhelming. They ruined a lot of people's lives, and they were shocked that people wanted money for it. I don't know why they're shocked. But essentially, they said, we have a cap of 36 $31 million US dollars, and too many people asking for it. So actually, if you opted in for the $125 US dollar settlement, you're not going to get that much. So basically, all of these things happened from one instant back in 2017. And the reason that really sticks out to me is I don't think that tech was at fault. In fact, if you read his latest updates that I read quite recently, but I haven't been able to validate it, it sounds like he did run two scanning softwares, and they did say that the patches were installed. So either it was a tech that didn't install updates, maybe it was software that failed and said it installed it, but it didn't. But I don't think that's the point. The point of the issue is from the conception of the idea, they didn't put privacy and security controls in place, which is what GDPR calls for from the conception of the idea. So I think if this were to happen in the future, if we were to be able to approach it with, from the conception, what do we need to do? What is the critical data that we are holding in our systems? And how can we design a solution that protects that? Because obviously they didn't do appropriate risk assessments. Obviously they didn't understand what that critical data meant, because they did actually ruin many people's lives. However, if they had had that, would they still have failed? Well, technically, if they had had mitigating controls in place, theoretically, they could have still been breached, but I think they would have caught it much sooner. So there's one thing that they could have done, and minimized the impact on the people, potentially, because potentially that very, very critical data, like in America, the social insurance number, maybe that wouldn't have been taken. I don't know, obviously, hindsight's 2020, but theoretically, let's say that happened. Next, what else happened? Well, they used this insider information to sell the data. And then later on said, well, okay, we don't actually have enough money to pay you. And, well, if you chose the credit monitoring, well, that's great, but we're going to actually give data to another competing company without your knowledge anyway. So those, to me, are really, really sad. And then, also, when they notified the people, their practices in place, told other people of other people's names. So if I received a notice, it could be like Jane Doe's details, and now I know Jane Doe was a part of the incident. Might not seem crazy, but I think that's quite a mistake. And then also, as I said before, that insider information. So what is the culture in your organization where people are more worried about the money that they're going to lose than the victims of the breach? So going back to the motivations. No, sorry. This is a really good quote that one of my ex-colleagues, I used to work at a company called Baringa, and she talks about inclusion and diversity and what she thinks that means. So I believe the answer lies not in policies or procedures, but in how we think as individuals. And the reason that was really, I guess, important to me is because that really sits with all of the incidents and all of the failures that I've seen in my job. It's how we think as individuals. High-performing teams, which is what I'm going to chat about now, the number one thing I see in high-performing teams is diversity. And a lot of times when I say that, people get really annoyed with me because I'm a female, and they're like, oh, she means female. They mean female. I don't just mean female. That is great if you have a gender-diverse team, awesome, but it's not the only type of diversity. Diversity is diversity of culture, points of view, experience, interests, and skills. And these are the really, really important ones to me. Obviously, there's more, but this is what stands out. So I grew up in Canada. I worked in the UK for many years, and now I've recently, hopefully, moving to Ireland. And as you can imagine, they think I'm a bit weird. I understand I am a bit weird, but it's because I grew up very differently, very different culture. I have very different points of view. So the third example I gave about the stalker, ex-partner stalker, was really hard on me because I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, and I've been through that. I've had a stalker. I had a stalker for many, many years, and I was terrified of him finding out where I was, as well as terrified of succeeding, because if I did, that would make him, see me and potentially do further damage. And so when I look at solutions, I don't look at, I want to build this secure because that's really sexy. Sexy security, controls are really cool. Brand new, shiny software, shiny devices, awesome. But I look at it more for, okay, what's the impact to the victim when we fail? Because we will fail. And that's important because not everybody has that point of view, not everybody has that experience, which is fine. But because I do, that's how I prioritize it. And so when I work in teams, we have really innovative solutions, really brilliant developers, which I am not. I do the nice, sexy networking. I love it. But I also think, okay, but just because we can take that data, why are we and do we need to? My experience is, well, I've worked again in networking, and I tend to think that, in my opinion, networking is really cool. And so when I want to hire someone that I think is brilliant, I have to remind myself that you can't hire in your own image. You can't, ignore the fact that you have an unconscious bias, and you have to recognize that other people are skilled in other ways. An example of this is when I first started working, I got a job at a software development company, and one of the highly technical questions was, pretend your switch died and you only have 2 small switches. And then they started asking the question. I said, okay, well, obviously you're going to look at your configuration management database, and then you're going to turn on spanning tree protocol because you can't plug 2 switches in together. Otherwise you'll flood the network. And they stopped and they're like, how did you figure that out so quickly? That took us 3 days. And I was like, for spanning tree, that's so foundational. How could that have taken you 3 bloody days? And then I remembered, that's very foundational to me, very simple. To them, that's really complex because they've never learned that before. And so instead of, thinking I'm all that super smart, I remember they would embarrass me if I even attempted to make a very small little script. So understanding that your experiences and what you think is normal is great if you have that diversity in your team so that everyone can think of the different scenarios and different threats. Different interests and different skills keep things interesting. Laughter, I know, has been told, probably many times you've heard this, that it kind of brings us together, and that's great. Being able to laugh in a team is wonderful, but also having things that we can celebrate together is also really good. So having different interests and different skills will add to changing your point of view and also, just being bloody cool. So one of my favorite neuroscientists, I think is his title, is named David Eagleman. He's got many books that I've also referenced. But he says that you become who you are not by what grows in your brain, but by what is removed. And the way he's meaning is essentially when you're born, and then when you're 2 years old, I think, you have 200 trillion synapses, I think is the number. And then from 2 to 25, so when your brain is matured, all you're doing is weakening and removing them. And why that's important is essentially to strengthen a synapse, you succeed in a action, and that's strengthened and retained. If you stop doing something, it's weakened and eventually removed. And that's what's actually making us different. That's making that diversity. And if you have multiple people that have had different skills and different lives, that's what's going to make your team more effective. Now, how do organizations motivate people to think differently, or to want to be in a diverse team, or to want to do their job but in a more secure way? Social science has told us for, I think, over a decade now, that actually people are motivated in 2 ways: extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic is typically how we pursue ways to motivate people, how we think the best way is, and that's things like external motivators, like giving the carrot or the stick. Either you don't click on the phishing email and you get a good job, or you do and you get punishment. That's great for very short-term engagement and actually really good to not achieve your goal. Intrinsic is the internal motivators, feeling like you're part of something bigger, making a difference, mastering a skill, and so on and so forth. And that one's great for long-term engagement and actual interest and continued and growing that actual thing you want. So an example is one of the books they used, a library, enticed children to read books by saying, every book you check out, you get a piece of thing for pizza. So it's like a little ticket. And throughout the summer holiday, they had a massive increase of children reading. It was brilliant. They're like, yes, we achieved our goal. And then come the beginning of the new school year, and nobody was reading anymore. And they said, well, why? Why is everybody stopped? And essentially, it was the kids weren't reading for the books. They were reading for the pizza. And when that was removed, they didn't care anymore. I mean, understandably, I don't generally have a lot of time to read. And I do like pizza, so I could see how that happened. But even though they thought they were achieving what they wanted, they realized because they were doing it extrinsically, nobody actually retained that and was motivated to continue reading. So essentially, what I view the future state as is technology should be architected for the humans. It should be architected for the people that are going to be using it, for your consumers. Security should have an intrinsic motivator. We should obviously, have diverse teams and think of the different threat maps and different scenarios, but we should be motivated to do it because we want to do it, not because we're going to get a little piece of paper for pizza. And then the last one, privacy, has to be done in an ethical way. Obviously, selling your shares is probably not ethical, but also you need to do it in a by design and by default. And the difference there is the by default is what's causing the users to actually use it. So by design, from the conception of the idea, I'm putting privacy or security controls in place, but the by default is I'm forcing you to use it. And if you don't want to use something like multi-factor authentication, you have to go through quite a few windows to actually disable it. I've recently had an app that I didn't know had multi-factor authentication and accidentally stumbled across it because I was going through a bunch of menus for something else. And that to me is a complete failure. So yes, you enabled it for your users, but you didn't tell them it existed, and therefore nobody's using it. So what can I do as an individual? So just to, summarize all of this I was chatting about, yes, a lot of organizations need to focus on these things and they can make a difference, but what can you do as an individual? So the first step, I think, is actually increasing your own knowledge and doing that by doing something like stocking yourself. I don't know if anybody in this conference chatted about open source intelligence, but essentially it's information publicly available online. And it's not hacking related. All you do is search your name or use different tools to help you kind of limit that data down to the individual you want to target. And in this case, you're targeting yourself. And it's to understand your e-footprint. I've done a lot of privacy exposure reports, and I promise you, it's actually quite surprising how much data we have out there. And even further, being able to use that data, that aggregated data, to build a picture of somebody's life and then be able to target them. Why is this important to you? Well, in last year, I think it was, I helped one of my friends on an ITV episode where we had 6 individuals that essentially they thought they were here for something else, and me and my friends got home, behind the scenes, investigated them. It was a lot of fun, but some scary things came up. And one of the things that is an example is a woman posted a picture of her son playing football or soccer, whichever one you call it, and he's got a little football and he's got the certificate, and he's really cute. He's got a cute smile. I think he's like 7. And what that told to me as a malicious actor was I know her son's first and last name. I knew his age, I knew where he went to school, I knew what after-school programs he was at, so I knew his physical location any time of the day. I knew her first and surname, and I would be able to use all of that information to gather any kind of information I want on his family and their history, and very easily I could then pretend to be somebody. And being quite educated in their background, I could then potentially go into a school or his after-school program and remove him from that. For her, that was absolutely terrifying. I mean, from that one picture, being able to start building a abduction plan, scary. But it was simple mistake. It was obviously she didn't mean for that to happen. She was just bragging about her son and his achievement, and it was great. But from my malicious view, I realized that's way too much information. So doing something like stalking yourself online, you can then identify the things that you actually probably want to remove, as well as the things that you maybe want to add. Another example is I did an investigation where a guy very well known in his industry, from where he physically lived, had a very unique name. And I searched it online, and what came up was his unique name that I found out later wasn't unique where he grew up, but where he physically was. And so I thought that was him. And then I looked through his Twitter and realized this is definitely not him. But potentially his clients wouldn't realize that. And the reason I knew it wasn't him is because it was a Twitter account that just labeled all of the lesbian sex scenes in movies. I figured that probably wasn't him. And then to make it even better, he also sent everyone to malicious websites. Again, probably not him. And so when I presented that to him, he was quite embarrassed. And he's like, I thought I was secure by having no data online. But actually, in this case, when you're well known, sometimes people masquerade as you. And so even having just a small presence sometimes can be quite beneficial. Understand your threat map. So in the case of that woman I investigated, she realized that publicly available information of her son in that picture probably shouldn't be public, and she then made it private, and also, instead of having a certificate, maybe just have him holding a football or soccer ball, whatever you want to call it. Understand the people that maybe you need to protect against. It can be a simple 5-minute threat map, like capability over motivation. If somebody's highly capable but have no motivation, they're probably a competitor, maybe. But those people you want to watch. Or somebody that's highly motivated but has no capability, again, you want to watch, because what if they team up with that other person? Somebody that has neither, you probably don't care about. It's the people that have both that you want to protect against. Another example, quickly, before I'm done, is I had a woman that she called me and she said, my Facebook account has been taken over. The thing I don't understand is I have no data of value. I have nothing to hide. Why would they take mine? And she found out that actually it was a terrorist group that had taken over her Facebook account. And yes, potentially she had nothing really of value that they would have gained from it. But if you haven't noticed, social media platforms ask for ways to validate you're a real person, such as a phone number or an email. Used to be an email you could validate by, yes, this is me, because I validated via that link. Now it's more and more a person, like an actual phone address. And the reason that's important is because they're doing that to minimize fake accounts. And so malicious actors like terrorist groups, they're not going to be able to just be like, yes, I'm a terrorist group, don't worry, give me this account. They actually will take over existing accounts to try and use that. This is a legitimate account, it's been posting for years, so it's less likely to be picked up as fake. So the last one, and the most important, I think, is actually recognizing your unconscious bias. So I know when you're hiring, you realize, okay, I've got to look at different skills, but also looking at things like, I'm going into an interview and it's during lunch hour. Maybe I should eat before I go into the interview, because I don't know about you, but my partner gets really hangry. And if he had to do an interview, I mean, he's a coach, so he doesn't do interviews, but if he did and he was hungry, no one would get a job. Nobody, even me, I would not get that job. So I have to remind him to eat before he does things. Apparently we do it as well. And booking things like thinking okay, I'm going to do this interview, I need to book out 30 minutes after to write up my findings, or I'm going to do this code review, I have to do 30 minutes after that I have to write up my findings, because if we don't, we'll then rush off and then make an assumption of what we think we remember. So taking the time and actually caring is very important. The references of my talk, I only have 10 minutes left. So the reference of my talk is essentially, the first one is a write-up by Nick Sweeting. He's the one that purchased the securityxx2017.com. It's a pretty interesting write-up, actually. Phishing Dark Waters, if you have any interest in how phishing methodologies work. It's a brilliant book. It's not teaching you how to create a phishing campaign, but it's teaching you why it's important, how to do it effectively, and considerations like maybe don't make it super duper hard, make it actually kind of easy, or notify your employees first and then build it up, because you want to teach them how to recognize it, not shame them. Social Engineering by the same author, very good. It's about human behavior. And then the last three are again about human behavior, but actually I think would be hugely beneficial to creating secure programs and secure cultures, because it's understanding people. The first one, The Brain by David Eagleman, brilliant book, absolutely love it. Full disclosure, I actually listened to it on audiobook because I'm shit at reading, but both of those are available. And Incognito, again, really interesting. And the last one, and I think if you don't care about any of them, please do check out Lost Connections. I'm not paid by any of these, but that one I really liked because it actually is looking at the cause of depression, anxiety, and loneliness in the world. And the reason I think that's really beneficial for your security programs or developer programs or whatever you want and whatever you're doing is because it helps you reconnect and understand where in our culture we've lost that along the way. Thank you.